From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones.
So a few weeks ago, I was in Lampedusa, which is Italy's southernmost island. It's in the middle of the Mediterranean, between Africa and Europe, just off Sicily. Beautiful blue waters, amazing marine life. But while we were there, we, had this real contrast of seeing some 200 migrants limping down a rocky passage to the harbour in broken sandals.
Shayma Bakht, a news reporter at The Times, has been meeting migrants as they attempt a new route which has opened up from the Middle East to the UK. Thousands are trying it, most aren't making it.
Bloodied bandages, it was men, women, toddlers.
Many are getting entangled and trapped in a nightmare en route.
When I spoke to them, they told me that they just survived being detained in Libya. And, the stories that they told me were just the most awful things that had happened to them there.
So what is happening to them? And is some of the Europe-wide clampdown on illegal migration actually trapping migrants in a new cycle of exploitation? The story today, heading for the UK, held hostage en route.
I often specialise on foreign investigations linked to home news. I've reported on migration a lot, whether it's been the kind of deadly Vietnamese route or only a few months ago I was in Iraq speaking to kingpins who have a huge part to play in the English Channel crossings. So yeah, it's something that I cover quite often, and it's the reason why I ended up in Lampedusa.
You're increasingly the migrant route correspondent, let's be honest. Lampedusa has quite a grim history. People remember from the sort of beginnings of the migrant crisis at the beginning of the 2010s. What exactly happened there then?
There were some really major disasters on the central Mediterranean Sea, a lot of bodies washing up onto this island. There were some cases, I think it was in 2014, where 200 migrants died all at once. But even in the time that we were there was a case of a newborn baby washing to shore. I think it's just, that contrast of this tiny little holiday island being just swept over by the migrant crisis.
And this new route that you've been investigating, just explain exactly what it is and where Lampedusa lies in it.
So Lampedusa is one of the destinations along this route, but the real route actually begins in Iraq. It's in Iraqi Kurdistan. So what's happening is there's a huge amount of people who want to come to the UK from Iraqi Kurdistan and neighbouring countries, Syria, Iran, who are filtering through to Iraq. And because Iraqi Kurds are dominating the channel crossings from France to the UK, they are able to coordinate for people to come directly here. So it's a brand new hybrid route to Britain where international gangs are coordinating sending people legally through legal flights using legal visas halfway to Europe, and then the other half they're pushing them through these kind of irregular illegal routes that can be incredibly dangerous. And gangs are charging around $10,000 to $17,000 to move people from a starting point of somewhere like Iraq onwards to Jordan or Egypt, and then to Libya, and from there on boats into Europe.
So as you've previously reported on this podcast, Iraqi Kurdistan, particular parts of it, have a real corner of the market of people smuggling to the UK and doing those channel crossings. So I guess people are being sort of sucked into or going through Iraq and then making that journey through, that takes you through Lampedusa on a boat into Europe. And then the hope is eventually into the UK. But it's a sort of mix of, well, flights and boats, legal and illegal means.
Yeah. These routes are becoming more complicated, basically, more dangerous, but the end result that many of the migrants on this route are hoping for is to come to the UK. Things are evolving as clampdowns harden, and so this is what we're seeing, more pit stops in order to get here.
And dangerous, which pit stops are the dangerous ones?
So Libya is extremely dangerous, and it's basically replaced Turkey as this kind of middle ground where migrants can wait while they plot which route they'll go. You know, the first half of flying into somewhere like Egypt or Jordan is relatively safe, and they arrive in Libya maybe under the impression that it will be safe because they've got visas. But what we're hearing is that many of them are being kept in this kind of detention economy where, you know, Libya is a very fractured country. So there's militia, there's smuggling groups operating, and they know that there is money to be made off desperate people.
Do we know how many are attempting this route?
We've been told by experts who have been really focusing and fascinated by this new corridor, it's probably in its thousands. So the numbers are really up and ticking, considering that, you know, it's only been since 2025 when experts have first heard of this route.
And why is it that this route has opened up?
So we spoke to GTOC, which is a global initiative against transnational organised crime, and it's this network of 600 experts. And they told us that they thought that this pattern of hybrid routes, so combining the legal with the illegal, regular routes, is a growing trend because Europe is very much clamping down on these borders. You know, in Turkey, their borders became reinforced with military patrol roads last year. There's been more arrests. Bulgaria increased raids. I think there were 16 arrests in January alone. And he basically said that we are going to see more of these more dangerous, more complex routes to the UK in the face of that. What the migrants are hearing is that we can get you through. Don't worry about the fact that you're hearing of people being arrested and this, and, you know, we're going to take you through a new route. And I mean, that was when I was investigating that Iraqi kingpin story that we spoke about. That was when I first heard of it, which was probably around the time when it just opened up. They said, you know, we've got our ways to get people into the UK. So that's what they're hearing, and they think, yes, please, without realising that they could be held there for months.
And as you say, you do talk to these sort of slightly shady characters who run these people smuggling routes. Have they sort of said the same thing back to you? Have they confirmed all of this?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, as I said in our previous reporting, when we got this opportunity to speak face to face with some kingpins who are very much involved on the UK routes, they told us that there was a new Libyan corridor opening up. The evidence actually came after that of there was some 200 Kurds that were reported by the local government as being held hostage on this route. So that's, you know, a direct exactly what they told us. But, you know, we reconnected with some of these smugglers and they confirmed it. They said this is the way that we are now moving people onwards to Europe, and people are willing to pay.
What do you think they make of you, these kingpins?
I think, you know, as a female journalist, sometimes you can be very much underestimated. And when I worked on a lot of these stories, I've been quite fortunate, in my opinion, to find female fixers who are local to those countries, who are able to help me gain the trust and speak to these people who we know are very much involved in these criminal activities. And I think that has worked to our advantage, and that they often speak a little bit too much because they really don't think that anything can come, you know, any kind of trouble can come from two women. But I think that's great because we, you know, I know from, for example, the local journalist I work with in Iraq, that she tried this with previous reporters and they just wouldn't speak to the men. So sometimes that works. And I think you get more information and then you get to kind of see the bigger pictures like this, you know, before they're even formed by experts, and you follow it along, and that's the only way that you kind of get to the root of those issues.
And of course, as we discussed, you also talk to the people who are going through all of this as well and paying those enormous sums and trying to go through these routes. One of them was a guy called Omid. Tell us about him.
Yeah, so we're calling him Omid for security reasons because of what he went through. But he was a 20-year-old man from Rania, which is in Iraqi Kurdistan. And he had approached a local smuggler to join a journey with some 100 other Kurdish people from the region. And they were all flown to Libya through Egypt, he said. And, you know, his reasons for leaving was poverty, it was unrest in the area linked to wars with Iran and Turkey, a lack of opportunities. And in his words, you know, there was really no other option.
If there's a lack of opportunities that he's complaining about, how does he get together the, what was it, almost $17,000 that these people smugglers want to move you to the UK?
So he said that he was able to gather that from other family members. I think from his version of the story, they all pulled in to send someone abroad who might be able to kind of help give remittances back home, which is really the kind of classic story that you hear from a lot of these migrants who end up getting a ton of money. He also said he took on loads of debt.
I guess family members see it as an investment. He might send money back if he makes it somewhere in the UK. So what actually happened to him?
So he tells us that he arrives at this airport in Libya. Their instructions was that someone was going to pick them up and drive them to these launch points on the coast. But instead, armed masked men grabbed them, put them in cars and took them to these unmarked locations. And they were placed in rooms, sleeping with 50 other people. He said there was blood on the floor and that they were beaten regularly and asked to call their family members and message their family members saying that they needed them to pay money for their ransom. He said in between this, they had food withheld, water withheld, and that many of them were also forced into construction work. And the beatings continued for months, and we saw footage that was sent back to some of the family too.
What was in the footage?
We saw quite a lot of videos and pictures. There were pictures of bruising on bodies. There were guns being put inside of people's mouths, footage of people being forced to dig up very arid lands and build bricks. You can hear in the background people complaining like, we haven't eaten, and messages that were sent back to family members saying, if you want your son to live and you don't want him to lose an organ, send this money.
Lose an organ?
Yeah, so that was something that we've heard kind of time and time again from people who claim to have been held hostage in Libya as part of this migration route, is that one of the biggest threats is that they will have their organs harvested. And, we didn't speak to anyone who said that they did, but I know the BBC did a report and they actually spoke to some other Kurdish survivors and they got a doctor to look at some of the scars and they said that was consistent with organ harvesting, because sometimes people don't know and they're drugged and they then see stitches on their bodies and realise that something had been taken from them.
Did Omid have that threatened?
Yeah, he had the message sent back to his family that would happen. He said that he knew of a person who had travelled with him who woke up with scars along his belly and was in incredible pain, who believed that he had an organ harvested.
So people in this situation have maybe paid around $17,000 for this. They've been stuck there, had all these awful things done to them or threatened to them. How many actually make it through to the UK and complete what was promised to them?
Well, based off messages that we've seen, some do. But the reality is that the majority are left behind and they have to endure months of this torture and months of slave-like conditions.
Shayma, on this new migrant route that you've been investigating, taking us from the Middle East, hopefully from the migrants' perspective, to the UK, you said that thousands have used this route since it opened up and became a channel that people use. How does that actually translate to infrastructure in terms of in Libya? What's there?
So there's no real number of how many of these migrant holding detention facilities exist, but the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organised Crime estimates that there could be 200. There's other estimates that say it could be, 40, and those are run by militia and local smugglers. So there is really no law to hold them accountable. These are centres where migrants are abandoned by smugglers and they're held by gangs for slavery.
And the Libyan government isn't exactly totally in control of the country. So, what are they doing about this, if anything?
Yeah, the governments are split anyway. There are two separate official detention centres run by the two separate warring governments, and human rights groups have found evidence that very similar abuse goes on there too. And, there are fears that Libya is officially profiting from this detention economy of migrants because they're funded by the EU in terms of logistics and training to prevent migrants from crossing over into Europe. But many see this as an incentive for migrants to be held in the country. And of course, if they're held in these militia-run compounds, that's an opportunity for those groups to make money off these migrants, either through, slavery, construction work, or by asking for ransom from their families.
So if there's EU money potentially in the mix there, what are they doing about this to try and not make this happen?
So a UN fact-finding mission to Libya stated that the European Union had aided and abetted the commission of crimes through its support to Libyan authorities to crack down on irregular migration. And we know that Italian authorities specifically have trained, equipped and financed the Libyan Coast Guard, including through the European Union's Trust Fund for Africa. So, these are all things that, from one perspective, are attempts to try and reduce the deaths at sea. But unfortunately, we know that bodies like the Libyan Coast Guard often use violence against migrants. And there is suggestion that they have links to these militias who profit off the abuse and detention of them.
And I guess that's the sort of, part of the awful byproduct of the kind of game of whack-a-mole that governments are playing, that they try and close certain routes, it opens up new ones, and then they're putting in money to try and help those places manage those people that are ending up there, in this case Libya, but all of this is just going into the mix and actually trapping people in these dreadful conditions.
Yeah, exactly. And, when we do speak to experts about what is the solution, they say that there needs to be more innovation, because the harder that you clamp down, the more likely that migrants will be stuck somewhere along the route in very scary situations like this in Libya. There's similar reports that we hear from places like Tunisia and other kind of launch points into the EU. So that is a worry.
And of course, lots of people are concerned about the welfare of these people wherever they are in the world. But if you're a UK policymaker, if you're Andy Burnham, you might be listening to this and thinking, well, what does it mean for small boats arrivals or any kind of illegal arrivals into the UK? What do the numbers tell us actually about what's actually happening in terms of the people actually making that final bit and getting into the UK and claiming asylum there, or trying to?
So the latest figures do actually tell us that the numbers are down. There was less than 15,000 people that crossed into the UK from January until August this year, which is down 43%. And that really is the pattern that we're seeing across Europe. When you look at Frontex's data, it looks like all EU border entries have gone down through irregular methods. But there are other worrying patterns that are happening at the same time. You can either see that from these kind of mega dinghies that are coming into the UK. Experts say that smugglers are now doing much harder and faster attempts to push people all at once, which can be more dangerous. And, people may not be entering, but when they do, they tend to be survivors of much more traumatic experiences. And that is also, of course, a concern for people in the UK. So, the methods in which people are arriving here, if they've then survived torture, abuse, that makes a difference into the state of mind that they are when they enter. So I think all of these things are important to understand. And it is important to look at the consequences of numbers going down, as well as just seeing it as an immediate success, because certainly GTOC have said that they believe that these harder clampdowns will result in, more kind of dangerous attempts from smuggling groups. So those are all things to consider.
And what about Omid, the chap you spoke to? What's happening with him and the people he travelled with?
So Omid was one of the lucky ones who was able to gather the ransom and pay off the militia that were holding him. He actually said that he believed that his local smuggler, agreed to him being sold off to these militia. And so, they paid the price. We don't know the exact number, but he said that he had to pay thousands in order to leave. And he's now returned back to Kurdistan, which of course is in many ways also very tragic. He survived the Libyan compounds, but he's now lost this huge amount of money and he's returned back to the very place that he wanted to escape.
What about the people who travelled with Omid?
He says that there were a few that made it, and he showed, messages that suggested that they had indeed made it to the UK. We did speak to, local groups who told us that 5 people from his group were still held in those compounds. They're still in those slave-like conditions, still sending messages back home. And some 10 other people have not been heard from. They're just completely missing. And unfortunately, we do know that people die while making that journey through Libya. So we really don't know what their current status is. I guess the kind of shocking thing is the fact that that doesn't seem to be deterring people. Omid says that he's aware of dozens of people who have made the journey since he returned. You know, the Kurdish regional government weren't shy about talking about the fact that people wanting to come to the UK had been held hostage. They even published pictures of them in these rooms that were sent by the people holding them hostage. But people continue to use the very smugglers that left them there. So this is a new route, and it doesn't seem like it's one that's going to end anytime soon.
Shayma Bakht, news reporter at The Times. The story at thetimes.com is our email address if you want to get in touch. And if you found this interesting, why not share a link with a friend and subscribe for free, and then you'll never miss an episode of The Story. That is it from us today. Today's producers were Olivia Case and Julia Webster. The executive producer was Taryn Siegel. Sound design was by Ross Burns. Theme composition was by Maula Seto. And I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.